The Summa Theologica is written in the 13th century by Dominican priest Thomas Aquinas. As for what I have understood with the context of this book is that the book itself was the theory of Thomas Aquinas towards the beginning of seeking God and also the way of our end to God. This book comprises three parts in where the first part was about the God itself through its nature, his existence, essence, and nature of man, and lastly, the 6 days working of hours of God in creation of the universe. The part 2 entails how man should act, habits, types of law, the virtues and the religious versus the secular life. Lastly, the part 3 entails how as we should deal with Jesus Christ, its incarnation, the sacraments, and resurrection. As you can see, this is the structure of Summa Theologica that reflects this acyclic arrangement. It begins with God and His existence. The entire first part of Summa deals with God and His creation, which reaches its zenith in man. The first part, therefore, ends with the treatise on man. The second part of Summa deals with man's purpose, the meaning of life, which is happiness. The ethics detailed in this part are summary of the ethics that man must follow to reach his intended destiny, since no man on his own can truly live the perfect ethical life and therefore reach God. It was necessary that the perfect man bridge the gap between God and man. Thus, God became man. The third part of Summa, therefore, deals with the light of Christ. In order to follow the way prescribed by this perfect man, in order to live with God's grace, which is necessary for man's salvation, the sacraments have been provided. The final part of Summa considers the sacraments. Furthermore, it was also describing as the relationship of man towards God and seeking our ultimate end with God. Currently, the Roman Catholic Church relies heavily on the Summa Theologica in its discussion on theology, philosophy, and morality, though it has since parted ways with Aquinas when it comes to the ideas of the late homonization, vegetative souls, and the Aristotelian view of embryology, among others. Overall, the Summa Theologica provides great insight into the prevalent Christians' views on human development and enhancement during the Middle Ages, though it is less representative of today's scientific and theological beliefs on these matters. This book also contains the Aquinas 5 ways on how to understand the 5 famous proofs for the existence of God. However, let us first ask how human beings can know the existence of God. One way to know God's existence is by taking it on faith from what the Bible says. But Thomas Aquinas is well aware that the Bible itself tells us that there's another way to know the existence of God. In Romans chapter 1 verse 20, St. Paul tells us that the existence of God is known to everyone, at least in general and confused sort of way from the beauty and goodness of natural world. Now, when the Aquinas turned to the writing of ancient pagan philosophers, he found exactly that he found people who had never read the Bible, but who had given serious arguments for the existence of God. And these are the 5 arguments to prove God's existence to answer the question concerning God's existence. The first argument that Aquinas formulated is the argument from motion. It is something in motion had to set in motion. After observing object in motion, Aquinas was convinced that whatever is currently in motion were at once at rest but had changed states when it was moved by something else. This mover was something once at rest as well but was also moved by something else, and this line of thought would go on and on until it forms an almost infinite series had been current events where the objects are both movers and moved. However, if this series of events needed something to begin the movement, then it is logically to assume that at the very beginning of this infinite series is the first mover which starts the movement. As Aquinas described this first mover as to the mover, a lever which is quite similar to Aristotle's prime mover, as we can see both this mover as one that is not caused or moved by anything other than itself, and for Aquinas, this is God. God that is the first and ultimate mover. The second argument is the argument from causation, which builds upon Aristotle's concept of the efficient cause. The main idea is that every object, action, or event, according to Aristotle, has an efficient cause or an entity or event responsible for its creation or change. Just like how a baby finds their efficient cause in their parents, and their parents on their own parents, and so on and so forth. Aquinas uses these examples of dependent relationship to show that every person or object in the world depends on a creator, and this creator also has its own creator, and this new creator has its own efficient cause. This cycle, much like the arguments from motion, can go on infinitely. However, according to Aquinas, it should not be so, since in the first place, the series would have not begun. It is then logically to assume that at the very beginning, there is the existence of a first maker or an uncaused cause, which, as the name suggests, is the efficient cause that is not caused by others or anything but itself. This uncaused cause is attributed by Aquinas to the Christian God. The third argument is the argument from contingency, which necessitates the distinction between necessary and possible beings. Possible beings simply but our beings that can be created and corrupted, or our beings that can exist and not exist. For example of a possible being is man, because we have the potential to exist through birth and the same potential to not exist through death. Plants, animals, and structures are among some of the other beings included in this category. With this in mind, it is reasonable to think that since most beings in the world are possible beings, then there must have been a time that they had not existed at all, which means that nothing ever existed. And if there truly was a time of pure non-existence, then nothing could currently exist because nothingness can only yield nothingness. Now, the only way that our existence at this very moment could be explained. For Aquinas, if there was a being that already exists despite the nothingness of a possible beings, this being is called a necessary being. On the other hand, are beings that necessarily exist or are beings that cannot be non-existent. For Aquinas, there must be at least one necessary being to exist at the very beginning for the rest of the beings to be able to exist, and this being is God. The fourth argument is the argument from degrees of perfection. This argument makes use of man's knowledge of perfection and his tendency to judge or evaluate whether an object or person is more or less perfect. This action of judging something to be more or less perfect means that there is a standard that is used for the said evaluation. But now, could man ever have such standards unless there is a being that is all perfect to compare it to? Aquinas affirms the existence of just a perfect being and says that if any other being would be compared or evaluated against such perfection, they would always be judged as less perfect. He calls this all is perfect being with God. Lastly, the fifth argument in St. Thomas Aquinas as 5 proofs of God's existence is the argument from final causes or design. Some scholars would also call this as the teleological argument. Aquinas drew on the notion of causality as presented by Aristotle to justify this argument. The final cause as described by Aristotle is the fourth cause, and is one that refers to the end that for the sake of which a thing done. Some scholars will also describe it simply as the cause that refers to the purpose of which a specific object or entity has been created to fulfill. Humans and most natural beings in the world have been designed to have a purpose, and we behave or act according to that purpose. For instance, the bird's wing behave in accordance with its design which allow it to fly. Humans talk using their mouths because this is in accordance with their body's design which allows them to utilize air and various muscles in their body to create sounds. For Aquinas, if there is some sort of this design that is set in our world, then there must be a designer. This designer cannot possibly just be humans or other natural beings themselves, as he describes man imperfect and not intelligent enough to such as a grand design. Some of the natural beings, Aquinas tells us, are not even capable enough to know what their end is, the design of the world. Therefore, must have been set by a being that is vastly more intelligent than humans and knowledgeable enough to guide them towards their end. And this is, of course, is God. So let's move on to the four main instincts that human beings have. But before that, we already know the natural law because Miss Barshal discussed it. So in order for us to fully understand the theory of natural law, Aquinas believed that God not only created the world, but he also remains intimately involved in it. Aquinas thinks that the instincts that live in organism have to do the actions that are good for them, is God's own wisdom imprinted upon them. He describes the inclination of created organism toward the things that are good for them as a sharing in God's own internal law. Natural law is the name that Aquinas gives to the human's being participation in internal law. Like other animals, we have instincts perform action that are good for us. To summarize, natural law involves both instincts and reason without inclination or instinct. We would not recognize certain things as desirable and therefore as having value without reasoning. However, we would not know the best way to pursue the objects which our inclination revealed to us as having a value. Aquinas described the natural law as the light of natural reason whereby we discern what is good and what is evil. He also says that this light we have within us allow us to know good from evil, that this light is an imprint on us of the divine light. God created us with both reason and instincts, and this capacity together illuminate for us the path to the flourishing or happiness. Aquinas believed that by reflecting on our instincts with reason, we could arrive at certain moral rules which we should follow in our behavior. These are the precepts of the natural law. Precept is another word for a rule which is intended to regulate behavior. Aquinas says that the very first of these rules is to do good and avoid evil. This precept in the sense that it is the most general moral rule. Whenever you are following another moral rule, you are necessarily following this one. For example, if you help someone in need, you are thereby doing something good. If you refrain insulting your roommate, when you're angry, you are thereby avoiding evil. Every other moral precept is a specific way of either doing good or avoiding evil. So, the precept do good and avoid evil as the first precept of non-natural law in the sense that it's presupposed by every other precept. We know other precepts of natural law by reflecting on the specific inclinations that we have as human beings, and as a great work does Summa Theologica, when he discusses natural law. Aquinas identifies four main instincts that human beings have. Two of these instincts are shared with other living things, while two are very specific to human beings. The instincts shared with other living beings are the inclination to preserve our individual life and to preserve our species. The other instincts which are unique to us as human are the inclination to know truth and the inclination to live in society. We are by nature curious about the world and want to know how things work. We want the truth. This instinct has led our race to pursue scientific inquiry and to develop arts. We are also by nature social beings, even those of us who are shy or prefer lots of alone time naturally have a desire to know and be known by other human beings and to live a shared life together. From these four instincts, Aquinas thinks that we can reason to some general precept. We should live so that we flourish and that other human beings flourish alongside us. For example, by reflecting on our desire to preserve our lives, we can realize that life is good and valuable, and that we ought not harm or kill other human beings. When we are harm or kill another human, we destroy something that is good that we have a natural inclination to preserve by reflecting on our desire to preserve our species. Aquinas thinks that we can know that we ought to care for and educate our offspring. Humans would not survive if parents did not teach their children what they needed to know to live. Examples of precepts that are derived from our desire to know the truth or do not lie and shun ignorance. Shun ignorance means to pursue knowledge when there's something important that we don't know. Our natural desire to know truth reveals to us that the truth is something good when we choose to remain in ignorance. We are choosing not to pursue something that's good for us when we lie to others. We are depriving them of the good of truth from reflecting on our desire to live in society with others. We can reason to many other general precepts about how to promote this good. An example from Aquinas is that we should avoid offending others if we don't take care not to offend others. It is very difficult to have a peaceful community life. There are many other precepts having to do with justice in communities, just as do not steal, which we can also know through reflection on how to best fulfill our natural desire to be in a community with others. Aquinas taught that our natural human inclination and the power of reasoning we have provided us with a basis for us to know how to live an excellent human life. It's worth pointing out that Aquinas did not think that every single human being could in a practice easily know what was required of him or her to act well in every possible situation by simply posing and reasoning about his or her inclination. Aquinas claims that some people living in a corrupt society could find it very difficult, if not impossible in practice, to reason to the precept of their natural law. Furthermore, Aquinas taught that even people with very good moral formation needed the assistance of other wiser, more experienced people to help them apply the natural law in specific situations in their lives. The precepts of natural law are very general guidelines. Further reasoning is required to know which more determinant acts in concrete situation count as following the precept or not following it. Aquinas thought that the role of the human law was to determine how the general precept of natural law should in fact be implemented in specific societal situation. Each society must make its own human laws in light of the very specific condition of the society, but all human laws must be rooted in and consistent with natural law.